Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first edition of the Heart-Led Leader Program with our good friend, Tommy Spaulding. We're so excited that you're here and that you're taking the time to reach into your heart and to become a better person and a better leader and be intentional about your thoughts. So Tommy's going to go over our speakers for this program, but I just wanted to put out a couple of notes. We wanted to thank Peacock and Lewis for sponsoring today's event. Brian was going to be here but to introduce Tommy, but he is at some member presentations today, so we wish him a lot of luck. Also, I'm going to put the credit information in the chat with the link. Please go ahead and make sure that you follow that link. At the very end of the presentation, we'll give you the password. You can also reach the credits by going to the Florida CMAA website and go to education. On the left-hand side, you'll see a tab for, go to education and then go to education credits on the left-hand side, and you'll see the Tommy Spaulding Heart-Led Leader listed there, and you'll use the code. So also, if you have any questions for Tommy, go ahead and put those in the chat. And if we have any time at the end, we'll go ahead and ask Tommy to answer those questions. But Tommy, it's all yours, and let me know when to start the presentation.
All right. Good morning, Florida Club Managers Association. I'm Tommy Spaulding, and I'm honored to be the host of our Heart-Led Leader webinar series. A few months ago, Beth and I were on a call together, and we were talking about COVID, and some of the meetings may have to get canceled, live meetings because of COVID, and came up with this idea about doing this 9-part webinar series. Beth, you can move to the first slide. And it was such an honor to really call some of my friends around the world that are the greatest, heart-led leaders and in the industry. And so we're going to have an incredible 2 or 3 month 9-part series, and honored to really kick it off. For those that don't know who I am, I had the honor to speak at the Club Managers Association National Conference about 10 years ago and met some incredible leaders and club leaders throughout the country, and was introduced to the Florida Club and Managers Association, about 5-6 years ago, and just have dear friends. And even though I'm not in the club business, I feel like I'm part of the family. So it's a real honor to be your host on this part series. Beth, if you can move to the next slide. So those that have seen my presentation or read my books or know a little bit about my message, I really talk about heart-led leadership, really servant leadership. And I've been doing this exercise for like 25 years. And every time I'm training an organization, I was just in Desert Mountain a couple of days ago in Scottsdale with Damon Diorio's team. And so anytime I talk to clubs, I gather the senior teams together, or the employees together, and I give them all sticky notes. And I give them, 2 color sticky notes, and I give them like a pink sticky note and a blue sticky note. And I asked them to write the name of the greatest, leader, the greatest manager, the greatest boss that they've ever worked for at any time in their entire career. It doesn't have to be their current boss, but the greatest manager, the greatest leader, the greatest boss they've ever worked for. And I asked them to write their name on, the sticky note. And then I asked them to think about, if they've ever worked for, a jerk, a self-serving leader, if someone that was arrogant or cocky. And I explained to the audience that there's, 2 types of leaders in the world. There's self-serving leaders, those that serve others, and then there's, they serve themselves, and then there's self-serving leaders that serve themselves. So are you a servant leader where you serve others, or are you a self-serving leader where you serve yourselves? And I asked people to write the name of the greatest leader on the sticky note, and then write their name of the biggest jerk on their, they've ever worked for, someone that's been a real tough person to work for, a self-serving leader. And then we have, this big wall that we have good leader and we have bad leader. And we ask people to stick the sticky notes there. And it's really interesting to see people think about, who's the best boss, the best manager, the best leader you've ever worked for, who's a true servant leader. And, there's lots of names of, who's someone that's been a terrible leader. And it's not that I look at the names and memorize these names, but it's just interesting to see this exercise, because what the goal is that we all want our name to be on that, that pink, good leader piece of paper, the sticky note. We want us to be thought of as someone that has a great influence on the lives of others. And what I realized, as much as I love writing books, you can't learn leadership by reading a book. You can't truly learn how to be a heart-led leader by just reading a book. or even taken a seminar class. It takes some real time to learn how to be, a true servant leader. And that's really the essence of this 9-part program over the next 3 or 4 months, is that we want to take you through a journey, and we want to help you and your leaders at your club to be truly heart-led servant leaders, and more importantly, to build a culture at your club of heart-led leadership. And we believe if you can truly build a culture of heart-led leadership, that you'll have outstanding results, and you'll have great member satisfaction, employees that love the work there, and senior teams that's strong, and all the things that we want. And I can't do that myself. So that's why I called my friends. And Beth, if you could just move to the next slide here. Beth and I talked months ago, and we really talked about, if I had the opportunity to invite, 8 or 9 of the greatest, leaders in the country, heart-led leaders and people in the industry and speakers and authors, who would they be? Well, first thing I said is, well, 3 or 4 of these people are all $100,000 or more. A couple of them are $150,000 to hire for an hour, so we can't afford them. And she goes, well, just put it out there. And so, we came up with a budget, and I called a lot of these people, and I just asked them, I got this great, I hate calling a client because I don't ever really feel like the Florida Clubman Association is a client. Your dear friends. But I said, I got these great friends, the Clubman Association, that are going through a really challenging time with COVID right now. They're working their tail off. Would you consider doing it? And everyone I asked, except one, which I won't mention, they all said yes. They all said yes. Then I'll reduce. And a lot of times I just made a donation to their charity, or Beth did. And so we got them all say yes. And these people are the most incredible people, and a lot of these faces. And so I'd like to kind of give you an overview of why I chose each one of these people, and how this 9-part series is all going to culminate at the end in October to really learn this journey of heart-led leadership. Our first speaker that we have is Lee Cockrell, and that's our next speaker on March 9th or March 30th. And Lee Cockrell is now retired, and that's the bottom right with the turquoise tie. And though many of you know who Lee Cockrell is, he was the chief operating officer and executive vice president for Walt Disney, and I think he spent almost 47 years with Walt Disney World. And he wrote the book Creating Magic, which was a New York Times bestseller, which really is probably, I think, the best book on Disney. But Lee had 40,000 people under him, and ran all the parks at Disney, and chief operating officer. And he also started the Disney Institute. So he really has a great legacy there, really teaching what the magic of Walt Disney World is. But what I love about Lee is he's more of an old school, and he'll show up on a treadmill with the coat and tie on. He's more old school. But I had him speak one time to an audience for my National Leadership Academy. And he really was vulnerable about his depression and his anxiety and what he went through when he retired. And I love that. And I'm sure he's going to share that too. So Lee is someone that actually is unique of all these speakers, because he has practical experience, running Walt Disney World. But then he also now has 4 or 5 books. He's on the speaking circuit, and he's a thought leader and writing books on leadership. And that's Lee Cockrell on March 30th. The next one is Walt Rockowich, and he's I would say the bottom left, the guy that's kind of in a blue shirt and a navy blue sports coat. This got a smile on an arm like this. And Walt is one of my 2 or 3 top mentors in my life. Many of you remember Walt, that I wrote about him in the Heart-Led Leader. He lives right down the street, and he's a dear, dear friend. Walt wrote his first book, Transfluence, that I had the honor to endorse, just came out last month. And Transfluence is basically transparency and influence together. But Walt's claim to fame is that I wrote about in the book is he was chairman and CEO of Prologis, which is a global real estate company. They basically own all the warehouse space in the world. If you have a warehouse, Prologis probably owns it. And it was, a $20-30 billion company. And in the 2008, in the crash, the market crash, the company went from $20 billion market cap to a $550 million market cap overnight. I mean, just picture losing 95% of your entire equity of their company from 20 billion to 550 million. The CEO at the time was a narcissist. He was a self-serving leader. The culture was terrible. Walt actually resigned 6 months before. He was the CFO and raised up to be, the president, and then resigned because he couldn't stand the leader. He was working for a self-serving leader, and the company was tanking. And the board finally fired the CEO and hired Walt to come back and to lead, which is going to come down in Wall Street as one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in the history of the S&P 500, because Walt took that $550 million company, took it back up to $30 billion, and one of the greatest corporate turnarounds. And when you ask Walt, and you'll learn about him, because I'm going to interview Walt, how did you do it? He would say, love. I did it through humility. I did it through serving and loving others. And it's a really great story. Walt's on the board of Marriott Hotels. He's the chairman of board of Penn State University. I'm going to ask him a question about, he managed the whole Sandusky, Coach Paterno firing, and that whole terrible thing that happened at Penn State. Walt was on the board and really was in charge of, handling that and dealing with really distressed situations. So Walt is an incredible leader, one of my best friends, and I think we're going to love, really learning from Walt. Walt has taken me down to Mexico to build homes for the poor, and he's just had a huge influence in my life. And we're going to learn so much about heart-led leadership and how he truly turned around one of these companies because of it. The next speaker after that is Cheryl, and Cheryl will be the top right corner there, the lady with the glasses. And you all know about Cheryl that's heard me speak, because I talk about her in every speech that I give, because I think, in my humble opinion, she's the greatest heart-led leader, the greatest servant leader in corporate America in today. I would put Cheryl and Walt in that kind of same category, but Cheryl takes it to a whole other level. Cheryl was a senior executive at Kentucky Fried Chicken, was fired years ago, became the CEO and president of Popeyes. We all know that story that I've talked about. Popeyes was inches away from bankruptcy. The stock dropped from $57 a share to $15 a share. There was lawsuits. It was the same store sales was declining, and the restaurant needed to be remodeled. It was a very dated brand, Popeyes. And she came in and totally changed the culture of servant leadership. And she dedicated spending, a third of her time pouring into her people. And she built a whole culture of serving each other. And she basically took this company nearly bankrupt, Popeyes, years ago. And she turned it into a multi-billion-dollar company and sold it to Burger King for incredible profitability. And she wrote a book called Dare to Serve, which became a New York Times bestseller. She's now on the board of directors of Chick-fil-A. She's on the board of directors of Pier 1 Imports, trying to turn around that company, rebrand Pier 1. She's just a legend in the business, incredibly bright, incredibly smart, and a dear, dear mentor of mine. And I've been telling her story for years, and now she gets to come on the Florida Club Managers Association webinar series and tell her story herself. I'm so excited about having Cheryl on there. She's an incredible mentor. I serve on a couple of boards with her, got to know her incredibly well, and she's a dear, dear friend. The next person after that is Liz Wiseman, and that is May 25th. And Liz Wiseman is a dear, dear friend. A little shout out to my good friend, Matt Lambert. When he found out that Liz Wiseman was on the webinar, he called me up and said, I've always been your friend, Tommy, but now I'm really your friend, because I can't wait to have Liz Wiseman on our webinar series. He was blown away. Liz is, $150,000 to hire. She is, the only way I can describe it, if you've never heard of her, she's the woman in the bottom center, is I love Jim Collins, I think, and I thought about inviting Jim Collins to be on this webinar series, but there's reason why I didn't. But I think she's the female equivalent of Jim Collins. She's one of the greatest researchers. She wrote the book called Multipliers, which was a huge bestseller. I think if you added all the books of all these authors, what they sold, Liz's book sold more copies of that. It was a huge legend book, like Good to Great, Jim Collins' book, and Liz Wiseman's Multipliers are probably the best-selling books of all time in business and leadership. And what I love about Liz is, one, is she's totally humble and totally down to earth and incredible, and has an incredible history of working for Fortune 500 companies. But Liz is what they call a thought leader. So all these other leaders that I'm inviting, including myself, we write books on leadership, But a lot of the stuff we talk about, for me, relationships, servant leadership, has been talked about before. I mean, it's nothing new to what I'm saying. A lot of leadership books we write are just recycled ideas: change management, culture, leadership, servant leadership, and so forth. Customer service, they're just recycled ideas. But then there's a few people like Malcolm Gladwell, Jim Collins, Liz Wiseman, where they create ideas, they create terminology, they create language in corporate America. They think about things in a whole new way where it's brand new. And that's Liz Wiseman on May 25th. Just love her to death, and been really just thankful that she said yes, and we're gonna really enjoy her. Oh, by the way, Liz Wiseman is so funny as well, and she's just a normal human being, and she talks about her marriage and her kids, and she's Mormon, and she's got great stories on that. It's just an incredible story about who she is. Next one after that is Chester Elton, and Chester Elton is kind of known as the apostle of praise, praising others. He wrote a book called The Carrot Principle, and Chester is the middle left, or the middle right over there with the kind of the white and blue checkered collar shirt, kind of half bald. Don't tell him I said that. He's out of New Jersey and just a fantastic guy. And he wrote a book called The Carrot Principle, which is how do you dangle a carrot in front of someone? How do you truly motivate someone? And he's an incredible speaker and really teacher about how do you truly build a culture of rewarding your employees, and how do you motivate them, and how do you hold that carrot, and how do you treat them, and how do you really lead with gratitude. His new book's called Leading with Gratitude. Chester Elton is a New York Times bestselling author, huge on the speaking circuit, just a wonderful, charismatic guy, very, very genuine. All these people here are just totally genuine, heartfelt people. After Marshall, we have Mark Miller, and Mark is the dead center guy. And I think you're all gonna just love Mark Miller. Mark, I think he was like number 3 or 4 or 5. He would never tell you the exact number of the first employees at Chick-fil-A. Like 42 years ago, he was one of the first employees, making chicken sandwiches. And he rose up to become one of the top 3 or 4, leaders of all of Chick-fil-A. And today he's in charge of all of their customer service. And we know that Chick-fil-A has the greatest, customer service in the world. And so the guy that, really kind of came up with My Pleasure, the guy that's really in charge of all the customer service and leadership development for all of Chick-fil-A, the hundreds of thousands of employees they have, is Mark Miller. And Mark is incredibly humble and genuine. And I think that we're going to learn a lot from him because he's so funny and he's so applicable. And he's written great books about it. I think he's got 8 or 9 books. He's written a book with Ken Blanchard. He's got a book called The Heart of Leadership. He's sold millions of copies of his books, but he truly tells the Chick-fil-A story. And I'm going to be interviewing him as well. And so I'll be asking, questions about how we can take Chick-fil-A's message into the club business. And Mark is a real dear friend. I remember I brought him in to speak at one of my National Leadership Academy fundraisers. We had about 300 leaders, and he was our keynote speaker. This was a couple of years ago. And I couldn't find Mark, because Mark was about to come up on stage. And as the lights came on, half an hour before, when we're having kind of breakfast, he was out there helping the Brown Palace staff bust the tables. He was going around to all the tables, picking up people's, eggs, dishes they finished, and busting the tables. And people didn't realize that he was actually the keynote speaker. He was kind of modeling servant leadership, and he's just the greatest guy. I actually skipped Marshall Goldsmith. We're going to go back on September 7th, Marshall Goldsmith, and that is the top middle guy with the white beard. And Marshall Goldsmith, I think he's ranked top 3 leadership coaches in the world. He'll tell you who his clients are, but he coached Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. I mean, he's the top CEOs in the world, their head coach. And I love his financial model. And I would never say this in front of him, but I think he charges $250,000 a year or $500,000 a year to be coached. And he tells the CEOs, if I haven't changed your life or changed your company, don't, here's the invoice. But if you don't think I changed your company or changed your life, don't pay me. And if you think you are, here's your $500,000 invoice. is incredible. But the top thought leader, he's got great books called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. He's a thinker as well. And he's really a business coach. And he's going to be coming to the webinar series, really kind of sharing, his 40 plus years of leadership coaching development and so forth. And his book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, is, truly incredible. And then last but not least is Ethan Fisher on October 12th. And originally, Ethan was not part of our series. We had one no from a friend of mine that said no, which I won't get into that. And I went to Beth and I said, Beth, the truth is there's someone I want to bring onto this webinar series more than anybody. And he doesn't have a New York Times best-selling book. He hasn't run a Fortune 500 company. He has really no credentials that would merit him to be part of this webinar series. But the reality is he'll change more lives of the Florida Clubman Association. He will have more people in tears. He'll move people's hearts in a way that no one will in the entire 8 webinar series. Many of you know who Ethan Fisher. He is the one that's next to the far left over there. Is the picture next to me with the brick wall in the background. I wrote about Ethan Fisher in my book, The Heart-Led Leader. But years ago, one of my dear friends was running the general manager of the Brown Palace Hotel, called me up and told me he's mentoring a young man named Ethan Fisher if I'd come down to go meet with him. And I went to the Brown Palace and we had lunch with Marcel, and then across the table was Ethan Fisher. And he had an ankle bracelet on because he was, 10 years, he was out of prison with ankle monitor. And he told me a story, which he's going to share, why he went to prison and why he served 10 years and what he did to go to prison. And he wanted to come out of prison and to do good. And he wanted to speak to high school kids about drinking and driving and drug abuse and second chances. And I heard his story and I just fell in love with Ethan, and not only fell in love with him, but helped him write his first book and helped him get on the speaking circuit, started inviting him over to our house. And he's really part of the fabric of our home. He's been at our home many times having dinner, and he's a dear, dear friend. And he's changed my life because I learned a lot about forgiveness and second chances and not judging someone that has tattoos and spent 10 years in prison, which I think I did before I met Ethan. Ethan's really, taught me a lot, and his story is so powerful. And now he's kind of on the corporate circuit as well, talking about culture, because all the clubs that people that in Florida that work for us, there's an Ethan Fisher, someone with a story, with tattoos or maybe a criminal record or something that they've gone through in their past. And we need to learn how to love and serve those types of people. So that's Ethan Fisher. So this is this 9-part series I'm kicking off of Heart-Led Leader, and the goal is by October 12th when we end with Ethan Fisher, and I'm going to be emceeing all of these sessions and introducing all these wonderful people to you that you've really learned, from Lee, from Walt, from Cheryl, from Liz, from Chester, from Marshall, from Mark, and from Ethan, and hopefully from me as well. And I want to thank the Clubman Association for putting this together. I want to thank Beth Sargent for putting this together and for really believing me. I've never done a webinar series like this before, this scope with these types of leaders, and it's the first of its kind, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. Beth, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. A lot of people have asked me, about my new book, 80,000, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it today because when it comes out next year, I want to be in more depth, but I want to kind of give you an overview about leadership, because I've learned a lot about leadership over the last 20, 30 years, teaching this stuff. And what I learned is that people won't remember how you led them. People will remember the influence that you had on their lives. And so people won't remember truly how you led them. I mean, people aren't going to go to, Kevin Carroll, Matt Lambert, Rick Bayless, Chip Mish, Carmen Ameritera, Michael Field, Tony DeRico, Fred Fung, Michael Bradfeld, and Stephen at IBIS. These are 10 leaders, in Florida Clubman Association that I would consider dear friends, the people that have had huge influence in my life. And when I learned from them, is that they don't look at their position as some title. They won't, they know that people won't remember how they truly led them. What people are going to remember, their employees, their team, is they're going to remember the influence that you have in their lives. And influence has been so overplayed. I mean, influence could be negative, marketing and everything with social media. The influence is it could be a negative thing. So I wanted to hijack that word back, influence, because that's what heart-led leadership is all about. And when you learn from, Lee and Walt and Cheryl and Liz and Chester and Marshall and Mark and I and Ethan, you're going to learn that leadership, heart-led leadership, true servant leadership, truly building a culture where you're changing the lives of others is all about influence. And how that whole thing really began, Beth, if you can move to the next slide, was years ago, I brought in a guy named John Gordon. And all of you know who John Gordon is. He lives in Florida. He's a dear friend of mine, and he's on the speaking circuit. He's written a lot of books. You go to the airport, you always see the John Gordon books. And probably one of my favorite authors, by the way. And he was speaking to my nonprofit fundraiser. And he said, I was on the radio the other day, and I heard that that the average person, influences, 2.8 people a day. And he just kind of mentioned that in his talk, 2.8 people a day. And so I took a pen and I wrote that number down, 2.8 people. And, he was saying that there was actually some research done at a university that the average human being every day, whatever jobs we have, that we bump into, meet people, the Starbucks person, the barista, the Uber driver, the delivery guy that comes to our club or employee, but we meet 2.8 people, 2.8 new people a day, and that we have an opportunity to influence them. And then he just went on to, something else. But as soon as he said that, it was like God was like speaking to me and saying, that's an important number. And so I did the math and I looked up, what's the average age of a human being in North America? And it was 77 years old. That might go up and down, year by year as health improves. But, if you take 77 years and 365 days and 2.8 people a day, and if you do that math, it actually comes out to 80,000 people. And that's why my book is called, 80,000. Is that in our lifetime as a young little kid, as we grow up to, playing the sandbox in middle school and, high school and college and our careers, and now running clubs and leading in the club management business, 2.8 people a day, we're going to meet, we're going to influence, we're going to have the opportunity to have an impact on 80,000 people. And I just said to myself, holy shit, that's a lot of people, 80,000. And I started thinking, well, what if all those people that you touched in your entire life, good and bad, you had a positive influence or negative influence, but everyone you've had an influence on, what if you all got together in the same place? Like, what would that look like? And I started thinking, like, where do 80,000 people fit? And you all know it's football stadiums. And it turns out there's actually 12 football stadiums in North America that have exactly 80,000 people. Lambeau Field, University of South Carolina, Notre Dame, I mean, exactly 80,000, seats. And so I started thinking, wow, what if at the end of our lives, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian, I'm going to go to heaven. You might have a different belief where you're going to go, but wherever you're going to go, right before you go there, when you die, right before you go to heaven or wherever you believe you're going to go, what if we all walked to the 50-yard line at our favorite football stadium and we were by ourselves on the field, on the 50-yard line, and we're looking up and we see all 80,000 people, every single person that we've had an influence on, and since we were a little kid, all the way up till the day we died. And what would that look like? What would that feel like? And more importantly, what would you hear? Would they be chanting your name? Tommy, you changed my life. Or would they be cursing your name? Will they be standing up and giving you standing ovation because the impact you've had in your life? Or would they be booing you because of the hurt and the cause, because you've thought about yourself your whole life? And when I first visualized that every person that I have an opportunity to meet, like after this webinar, I'm going to get my driver, we're going to go to the airport because I'm flying to Salt Lake City because I have a client in Park City. And so I'm going to get to meet new people at the airport and the flight. and when I rent my car at Enterprise, and when I get to my client's house, we're having dinner with new people. Like I will probably meet 5 or 6 new people today. Every day in our lives, when we go to work, we're going to meet new people, and we're going to be around our employees, and we're going to have an opportunity to influence these people. And there's not anyone on this call. There's not anyone in the Club Managers Association business that doesn't have a heart to serve others. I mean, you're in the business of serving others. But just because you're in the business of serving others, in the club business of serving members and serving your employees, doesn't make you a servant leader. A true servant leader is someone that constantly always thinking about others before yourself, and always thinking about the positive influence that you're going to have on the lives of others. And that's the journey that I want us to take over the next 4 or 5 months until October 12th, when we end our 9-part webinar series. Is I want you to be influencers. I want you to change the lives of others at your clubs. And I mentioned the 10 leaders, Kevin, and Matt, and Rick, and Chip, and Carmen, and Michael, and Tony, and Fred, and Michael, and Stephen, and Ibis. Met the 10 leaders in Florida that I've fallen in love with and loved their hearts. But I've met club leaders. Joe Crennan in Virginia is one of my best friends. And I mentioned I talked to Damon the Orioles team a couple of days ago in Scottsdale. And I've had the honor to meet so many amazing club leaders throughout the country. And what I truly learned is the great ones don't really care about all the initials after their name. I know the club management business has all these great initials, which I don't really know what they mean, but the certifications. That the great leaders really don't care about those initials. The great leaders don't care about what kind of remodel and $30 million renovation, or how many renovations and how many remodels you had in your tenure at your club. The great leaders don't truly care about growing the revenue from 10 million to 20 million or 10 million to 30 million throughout your tenure. The great leaders don't really care about what PGA golf tournaments have been held at your tournament, or the merits that your clubs have had. What the great club leaders that I've met, they truly think of their lives as how much influence they can have on the lives of others. And I have this little thing that if I can wiggle my nose and create a culture in the club management business, how like everyone wears like a leather belt, and you have like little notches on your leather belt, or maybe your bedpost, you have little notches. Tate, my son, every time he scores a goal, he puts a little notch on his bed, so he counts all these goals he's had, and there's all these notches on his bed. Wouldn't it be great in your industry? I'd love to create this with you, that at the end of your career, Kevin, Carol, how you doing? You end your career, what's your number? And he goes 5. Joe Crenn is 12. And Matt Lambert, he's 17. Like everyone has their own little number, and what that number is how many club leaders started at your club and grew up in your club, and you mentored, you influenced, you trained, you loved, you served, and then went on to become club managers. And if you think about it, that's an incredible legacy. And what is that number? I mean, you should actually keep track of that number, because that's true influence, is how many people have you mentored? I remember I had lunch with Rick Bayless in Florida a couple months ago, and I was talking about this idea, and he's like, he knew his number. I forgot what number he said. He goes, he knew exactly what the number was, how many people that have become, general managers and assistant general managers under his leadership. And when you mold these young men and women and send them on to other clubs, that's a reflection of you, right? It's kind of like network marketing, where like you influence someone, and they go to another club, they influence someone, and that's your legacy. I'd like to kind of create that with you. Beth, if you can move to the next slide. And so the book 80,000 comes out next year, and it really talks about that we want to build cultures of results. I mean, you're all leaders at the club. Your members demand results. They want a great product. They want a great customer service. They want good F&B. They want good golf, or whatever your club provides. But you have to provide outstanding results. You got to work within your budget. I mean, as managers and leaders of clubs, you have a lot of pressure to perform and to have outstanding results. And the way to create a culture with great results is you have to build a culture of influence. And that's one of the things you're going to love about when Cheryl from Popeyes gives her presentation in a few weeks. She really talks about, she actually built her entire culture by the staff influencing each other and pouring into each other and really, building a culture of influence. And when you build this type of culture, really amazing things kind of happen. If you move to the next slide, that'd be great. And so this book that I'm writing, 80,000, I'm really looking at all the people that have had great influence over my life. And I'd ask you to do the same thing, is to think about all the men and women in your life from when you were young, from maybe a teenager, when you were a kid in school, to college, to first job, or out of college, to your whole career. Who are the people that had great influence in your life? And when you think about those people and you actually write them down, mine's Mrs. Singer, mine's Jerry Middle, mine's Tom France, these great leaders. But when you write these people's names down, so these people that had great influence in you, you want your name to be on that, that pink sticky note. Who is one of the greatest leaders I've ever worked for? I want them to write your name down. I mean, if we had to actually define results over this, 9-part webinar series from March till October. I mean, if there was actually an ROI, what's the return on investment if Florida Club Managers Association is investing money into this incredible, 9-part webinar series? What's the return on investment? What is return on investment? I mean, for me, I would love for every person that goes through this 9-part program, for your name to be written on that pink sticky note. One day when I'm in the room with your employees and I ask them to write the greatest leader that they've ever worked for, they don't put their first job out of college. They don't put their, job when they're in high school. They put their current boss, you, or someone that worked for you. We want them to write your name down because of the influence you had in your life. Everyone remembers Tom France. He's the bottom left with a picture with me with the chubby cheeks. But Tom France, he was the keynote speaker when I was 15 years old in high school, a sophomore in high school, fell out of school because I was dyslexic, and went to my first Rotary Youth Leadership Camp. And Rotary was a big supporter of me when I was young. And Tom France was the president of Rotary. He was an HVAC guy, heating electrician, and just a wonderful young man at the time, and now passed away. But he was the keynote speaker when I was 15. And he was the first one to say, there's 3 types of people in the world. 3 types of people. There's the leaders, there's the followers, and there's the critics. Which one are you going to be? And that was the first time when I was 15 to realize that I wanted to spend my life, teaching and studying and understanding leadership. And I know for a fact I wouldn't be writing books on leadership and teaching leadership and studying leadership if it wasn't for, Tom France asking that question. There's 3 types of people in the world. There's leaders, there's followers, and critics. And then he asked me, which one are you going to be? And that's when I realized at 15 that we have a choice to choose to become a leader, choose to become a critic, or you choose to become a follower. And everyone on this call, and obviously I know you've chosen to be a leader, but once you've chosen to be a leader, then you have some more important choice to make. And that is what type of leader you want to be. And I believe there's 2 types of leaders in the whole world. You're either a servant leader or you're a self-serving leader. You either serve others or you serve yourself. It's a choice. And Tom France really kicked that off when I was 15. Huge influence in my life. And I wrote about him, 80,000. Mrs. Singer is my 10th grade teacher in high school. Those that know my story, I'm severely dyslexic. I got ADHD, ADD. I spent my time in the resource room in school, barely graduated high school with a 2.0 GPA because of my learning challenges. Mrs. Singer was the only teacher in high school that really took me seriously, that knew that I was smart. I just wasn't academic, and saw my giftedness, and asked me to join an organization called DECA, which is Distributive Education Clubs of America. It's kind of like junior achievement. It's a business club in high school. And with my support of Mrs. Singer, I became a state champion in DECA and was a national champion, came number 3 in the national DECA competition of entrepreneurship. And that was really what gave me the confidence to move on in life. And Mrs. Singer really believed in who I was. When I was getting all D's and F's, she made me feel like I was getting all A's and B's in life. And she was a huge influence in my life, and still talk to her today. And the last one I'll just mention is Jerry Middle. That's the middle there with the older gentleman with the white shirt. And there's no man on this planet that's had a greater influence on me than Jerry Middle. And I have a father who I love dearly and had a huge influence in my life. And those, Frank DeAngelis, huge influence in my life. And my grandfather, who's a barber, who had a huge influence in my life. But the one man that had the greatest impact of my life was not my father, was not my grandfather, was not my neighbor, was not my boss, was my insurance agent. That's right, my insurance agent, Jerry Middle. I wrote about him in my first book. I wrote about it in my second book. I wrote about it in my third book. But he's had more of an impact on me because he invested in me. Every week for the last 20 years, I've either had breakfast, lunch, or dinner with him, or a phone conversation if I'm traveling. Every week, he knows everything about me. He knows everything about my marriage, what's going on in my life, my health, everything. When I got married, he's the one that said the prayer at our wedding. When Jill and I bought our first house, we didn't have any money, and I couldn't even afford a mortgage to get a house. So Jerry co-signed my mortgage so I can buy our first house. I mean, the things that he did, I was really angry at my church. And for years, I was not going to church. And Jerry kind of got me back going to church, got me right with God. I mean, the incredible impact that he's had in my life and still has. And so the book that I'm writing, I'm trying to inspire people, to be a Tom, to be Mrs. Singer, to be a Jerry, to have a huge influence on your life. And you don't have to be old or a teacher or a positional authority to have this. On the top right over here is a picture of my son, Tate. And my son, Tate, that all is probably had the hugest impact in my family. Of course, I love my wife. I love my older son. I love my daughter. But our 13-year-old boy, Tate, has probably had more influence and more impact than all the lives of our family than anybody. I mean, he's just a natural leader of love. And he's a hockey player. And I think those that know me, he's one of the top hockey players in the country. He travels all over the world playing hockey. We're leaving for Nashville tomorrow for a hockey tournament. And he's an incredible player. But what makes him great is not because he's a great, hockey player. There's a lot of great hockey players in the country. It's his heart to make an influence on others and to understand that at 13 and 12 and 11 and even at 10 years old. And a few years ago when Tate was just 10, he played for this team in Colorado, and the coach added another goalie on the team named Christian. And he was kind of like a practice player goalie. He wasn't, this team travels all over the world playing hockey, and these 10-year-olds, the best 10-year-olds out there. And he put this player on the team just to show up at practice so there'd be two goalies for scrimmages. And his name was Christian, and he really was not a very good hockey player. And these 10-year-old boys, they didn't overtly tease Christian, but there was a way that they made Christian feel like he wasn't really part of the team. He wasn't invited to the birthday parties, wasn't invited to the team dinners. They weren't high-fiving him in the locker room. He was just basically that scrunt, Rudy type of player that went to all the games, got his ass kicked and beat up, but was never really acknowledged. And Christian had some learning challenges. I think he had some health issues where he nearly died when he was young. And so he wasn't just a great athlete. And Tate kind of noticed that this kid was not feeling part of the team, and he was close to quitting. And it was, a hard position to be in. You work your tail up, and you don't get to travel and play the games, and the players weren't really very nice to him. And so, halfway into the season, this mother of Christian, Christian's mother, calls me up on the phone, and she says to me, "Do you mind sending me all the Saturdays in the fall, September and October, that your son is available?" And I thought that was such a weird question. Like, she wanted to know all the Saturdays that my son was available. And so I sent her like 4 or 5 different Saturdays that Tate was available. And then she texts me back. She goes, "Good, because Christian is having a birthday party. And the only person he wants to have at the birthday party is Tate, because he's the only one that's nice to him." And so I was asking what dates Tate's available, because I want to arrange my son's birthday party around your son's calendar. And I remember hearing that. And I remember Tate was just got named captain of the team at that time. And I told Tate, "I don't care that you're named captain and that you might lead the team in goals and assists and that you're this incredible player. What I care about is that a player and a mom rearranged their birthday because they wanted you at their birthday party. And I think that really sums up kind of influence is, do we live our lives where people want to rearrange their birthday parties? People want to rearrange their lives because they want you included in it. They want to rearrange their vacations. They want to rearrange their social plans to make sure you're a part of it. I mean, that's really the ultimate litmus test is, do we live our lives of influence where people want to be around us so much and will do anything to be around us and change their schedules, rearrange their birthday because of the influence you had in their life? And my son, Tate, really taught me that. Beth, if you can move to the last slide. So this is all about influence. And I really want us to think about over the next, March, April, May, June, July, August, 5-6 months, this 9-part series is I want you to grab, a piece of paper, write down some notes over the next 9 months. And, hopefully one of those notes is really doing an audit of all the people that you have an opportunity to influence. I mean, 2.8 people a day over the next 4 or 5 months, you're talking hundreds of people that you're going to have a chance to influence throughout this webinar series. And the goal is by the end of the webinar series, when Ethan Fisher and I wrap it up in October 12th, that you'll have this list full of people that you are actually being really intentional. But here are the people on my leadership team. Here are the people on my staff. Here are the members. Here are the people that I work with every day that I want to have a positive influence on my life. I have customers and I have clients that are tough to love. And I'm sure that you have members that are tough to love. I have a lot of friends in the club management business, and I've been around a lot of general managers that have to deal with, high maintenance members, and they're tough to love, but you have an opportunity to be an influence on them as well and model what it's like to be treated with servant leadership and so forth. So please take out a piece of paper throughout the next few months. Please write down people in your life that you want an influence on and do an influence audit. And actually do an audit for yourself as well, which is really healthy. Think about all the people that had a great influence on your life, your coaches and managers and bosses and friends and neighbors, the people that had a huge influence in your life. And the greatest gift you can give them is write down the name of all the people that influence your life and call them up and tell them, email them. And if they're dead, call up their widow, call up their kids and tell them that you're their husband or their father or their wife had a huge influence on you. What a great legacy. We don't do that because we're so busy with these damn phones that we don't tell great people in our lives that had a huge influence on lives how much they meant to us. So the audit can go both ways. Beth, if we can move to one more slide. Picture of a chalkboard, and I want to close with my favorite story, and it's actually chapter 1 on 80,000. It's the first chapter, and to share this story, when I contacted my publisher about writing my 3rd book, usually you have to write like a 50-page business plan. Here's the book. Here are other books in the genre. Here's the audience. Here's the chapters. You have to have 2 or 3 sample chapters. You have to have a table of contents. Here's the arc of the book. Here's the competitive analysis. Here's the marketing analysis. Like, you have to convince the publisher why they should invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars on this book and promoting it. It's quite a process. I went through it twice with my 2 books. And it's kind of a guarantee that you have to, it's called a book proposal. You have to do this book proposal to get a book deal. Well, my 3rd book, I wrote this story out I'm about to share with you about this teacher. I literally wrote the story out and said, here's what I want to write about. No book proposal. I just wrote the story, sent it to my publisher. My publisher literally, she called me up on the phone after she read the proposal. She read the story. Her name is Tina. And she was crying on the phone. She goes, you got a book deal. And so the story is really that powerful that I didn't have to write a proposal because the story of influence was so powerful. She understood my heart of what we want to do. So I want to close our little time this morning and kick off our 4 or 5 month, 9-part webinar series with this story, a true story of a teacher. Not just any teacher, but a math teacher. And she was an 8th grade math teacher, and she taught in Nebraska and in the Midwest. And she was teaching 8th grade math, in the early 1970s. And her name was Mrs. Lynn. And it was a Friday afternoon, the Friday before spring break. And it was the last period of the day of 8th grade. And then after that Friday afternoon, it was spring break for the whole, school. And so try to teach algebra on a Friday afternoon, the Friday before spring break, and the windows were open, the sun was shining, the kids walked in the room, and there's 36 classmates, and they were bouncing off the walls, walking in hyper, 8th grade, mentalities, and she couldn't get them to calm down. And she just realizes that she's not going to be teaching math that day, and that she needs to pull an audible, as great leaders do and great teachers know. And so she asked all the students, the 36 students, to rip out a piece of paper and put it in front of you with a pen. And she turned around on the chalkboard and she wrote the first and last names of all 36 people in the class. And she goes, what I want you to do is I want you to follow me, and I want you to write on your piece of paper all 36 names of the first and last name of everyone in your class. And they all did. They all quieted down. And they took out a piece of paper and they wrote all 36 names on the piece of paper. And then what she said is, what I want you to do during this class is, we're not going to teach math, but right before spring break, I want you to spend this hour really thinking about all 36 people in this class. And I want you to find one word that best describes all 36 classmates, each person. One positive word, one wonderful thing about them. What do you love about them? What do you admire about them? If you don't know about them, just know them from afar. What's the one thing you respect about that person? Right, one word. And so they did that. They went through each one, Susie, a nice word, and Rick, a nice word, and Larry, a nice word. And all 36 names, they found one nice word. So Mrs. Lynn, she collected all pieces of paper. The bell rang. It was Friday. It was spring break. And they all went away for spring break. And what Mrs. Lynn did over spring break was she took all 36 pieces of paper and she took out 36 clean pieces of paper and wrote the first name on each paper. And so Kevin got his piece of paper, and then she transcribed all 36 first beautiful words, one words about Kevin, all 36 words. And then Sarah, she wrote Sarah's name on the piece of paper, and then she transcribed all 36 amazing words about her. She did this to all 36 classmates, that each one of her students had a piece of paper with 36 beautiful words that their classmates said about them. That took a lot of time. That's what she did during spring break. When spring break came back and school came back, and she got them back on a Monday morning, and she handed out those 36 pieces of paper to each of her 36 students, and she watched them. And they were quiet, and some were kind of giggling, and some were laughing, and some were kind of crying, and some were blushing, reading 36 amazing words about you. And she was glad she did the exercise. And a few minutes later, the exercise was done, and kids folded up the piece of paper, put it in their pocket, and they went on teaching algebra. And that was 8th grade. And she never heard about that exercise or anyone ever again. And then fast forward like 5 years, she gets a phone call years later, about 5 years later. And it was one of those dreaded phone calls that any teacher, any parent does not want to get. And it was a phone call from a father of a former student. And turns out that Mark, in her 8th grade math class 5 years ago, was killed in Vietnam, in the war in Vietnam, in the late, in the 70s. And they're having a funeral. And the father wanted Mrs. Lynn to come. And Mrs. Lynn actually heard that happened, and the whole town of Nebraska was having this memorial service for this fallen soldier. And she went to the church, and it was packed. And she stood kind of in the back of the church, just thinking about, what a nice kid he was. And he was the quarterback of the football team in high school. And she remembered teaching him math in 8th grade and had great memories. And she was walking to the parking lot, go to her car after the funeral. And the father sees her and asks Mrs. Lynn to come back to the house. They're having friends and family at the house to a little celebration and to celebrate Mark's life. And so Mrs. Lynn comes to Mark's home, childhood home, and sees the parents with a bunch of friends, eating sponge cake in the family room. And as soon as Mark's father sees Mrs. Lynn walk in the house, Mark's father asks Mrs. Lynn to come back to one of the rooms. And Mrs. Lynn follows Mark's father into Mark's bedroom. And it was very obvious that Mrs. Lynn was in Mark's bedroom because there was a Cornhusker, Nebraska Cornhusker duvet and all the football trophies. And, it was definitely his childhood bedroom. And she just got, goose pimples and was looking at this kid that was now killed and gone. And then at the corner of Mark's bed, there was an infantry helmet, an army helmet. And she couldn't keep her eyes off the helmet. And the father noticed that she was looking at this helmet. And so the father walks over and picks up the helmet and hands it to her and said, "There's something in here that I want you to have." And Mrs. Lynn takes the infantry helmet and turns it upside down. And tucked in that little rubber band that holds the infantry helmet was a piece of paper all folded up that was 5 or 6 years old, scotch taped and yellow stained and dirty. And Mrs. Lynn opened up the paper that was tucked under the helmet. And it was that in her handwriting of Mark's name in 36 words on that piece of paper. And she couldn't believe she was holding the piece of paper that she handed Mark years ago in their 8th grade class. And the father said, that piece of paper literally changed my son's life. He read it every day for months, if not weeks, and he kept it in his pocket always. He never left home without that piece of paper. And he kept it for years. And when he was killed in Vietnam, and when they found his body, that piece of paper was stuck under his helmet. And I want you to have that because of the influence you had on my son's life. That's the influence that we want to have on the lives of others. This is an 8th grade math teacher that had students, a couple times a week for a semester teaching algebra. And we as club managers have hundreds of employees that come to our facility every day that call your club home. We have neighbors and friends. We have thousands of people. We'll have 80,000 people in our life that we have the opportunity to have an influence on. And we have a choice. Do we want to be Mrs. Lynn, where years later, people are still talking about the influence that you had in our lives? That's what heart-led leadership is all about. Heart-led leadership is not just about leading people, because people won't remember how you led them. People remember the influence you had in their lives. And I think we're all called to love and serve all people and to build cultures at our clubs to serve and love people and to have influence on people, our members and our employees, our staff. We want to influence our spouses. I want to influence my wife and my children. We want to have a great influence, but how do we do that? How do we become heart-led leaders? How do we have a positive influence in lives? I mean, how do we do it? You can't just read a book or, watch a class. And hopefully this, 9-part webinar series will move your head and move your heart and teach you. Each webinar series will bring you closer and closer to becoming that heart-led leader. And you'll get to learn from people that have actually done it in their companies. They've actually built companies with heart-led cultures, and you'll get to meet authors and leaders that have written about it and studied about it, like myself. And I'm so excited. I'm so thankful for Florida Club Managers Association. And this is no bullshit. I did 100 to 200 talks a year, stadiums of people. That was my job as a speaker and as an author. You write books and you speak at major conferences. And that was my job for 15 years. And then I got great purpose and passion speaking to millions of people. And then COVID happened. And as it changed all our businesses, no one was hiring me at all. There was no one hiring anyone to have a speech of 30 people, let alone 10,000 people. And it went from, a couple hundred a year to zero. And then I started doing some webinars and, people got kind of zoomed out and webinared out. And as much as I enjoyed webinars, I'm in my home, I'm talking to a computer right now. You're in Florida, I'm not with you. And so it was really hard. And I went through some probably a little depression and sadness about my purpose. And, I can't just write blogs and, how do I make an impact? and Beth Sargent, Matt Lampert, and Kevin Carroll, and Rick Bayless, and some great friends in Florida said, why don't you start going around Florida and going into the clubs and speaking to the leadership teams? Then I went to the West Coast and met Tony DeRico and Fred Fung and Michael Bradfeld and Carmen from Mediterra, who brought me into their clubs. And I started going into clubs and talking to their team. And it was the most rewarding work. And now I'm traveling all over the country, visiting clubs and going into their senior teams and giving heart-led leadership presentations. And it's just won my heart. And it's got me back working again and got me back making an impact. And the truth is, the influence that this has had on me is that when my next book comes out, I'm not sure the stadium speaking is ever going to come back. And I'm not sure I even want to do it, because now I see the impact. When you go into a club, you get 20, 30 of their leaders in a room, you spend a couple hours with them, that's impact. And so thank you, Beth Sargent and many of the leaders at Florida Club Managers Association for inspiring me to rethink my model and for allowing me to come into your clubs to teach this stuff. And then for allowing me to put this incredible webinar together that's going to change the lives of others over the next 4 months. It's such a blessing. I'm so thankful. And so I'm going to bring back Beth. She's going to kind of tee up our next thing, but I hope you have a wonderful spring break, a wonderful couple of weeks, and we'll see you on March 30th with Lee Cockrell.
Great. Thank you so much, Tommy. You always mean so much to us, and just give us those little nuggets, one nugget at a time, that we all go day to day by. I know I do. And please follow Tommy on Facebook and Twitter. And he puts out a lot of inspirational messages all the time. So please keep in touch with Tommy. Also, just wanted to remind you that in the comments, I've been putting the link to the SurveyMonkey. To get your credits for today. You can also go to the website under education and education credits. The link is also there. You have until 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon to put in the password, which is 80,000 is the password. So wanted to make that impactful for you. So you'll be remembering that book as it comes out next year. And also just want to take just a moment, if I can, to play something for you that we put together with our friend Dominic at Private Club Films, which talks a little bit about what's coming up for us this year. So give me just a second to cue this up, and I wanted to play this for you as well.
As the world around us continues to find new and innovative ways to play the hand we've all been dealt, the question any business, organization, or association must answer is not just how are we going to respond, but how best are we going to respond? And for us here at FLCMAA, we've embraced this challenge of change boldly and broadly ahead of our 2021 year of education. While the traditional in-person events may not be able to happen this year, it doesn't mean that forward progress and upward momentum cannot be achieved. This year, over the next 8 months, no less than 40 individual online educational sessions and webinars will take place on topics that allow you to be better tomorrow than you are today. But for now, let's focus on those in the immediate future. In March, April, and May, the calendar is jam-packed. We'll deliver virtual wine tastings, host roundtable discussions, discuss insurance and legal considerations in dealing with COVID-19 vaccines for your team, how you can utilize LinkedIn to your ultimate benefit, and last, but certainly not least, a 9-session heart-led leadership series conceived, developed, and organized by Tommy Spaulding.
The goal is to, over the next 9 weeks, is how do you really teach this stuff? How do you build a culture of heart-led leadership that can truly transform lives of the people that follow you? You have 9 speakers, me being the first one, kicking things off, and y'all know who I am. What I love about these 8 other speakers is 4 of them have either been CEO or president or have run, Fortune 500 multi-billion-dollar companies. And so they've actually built heart-led cultures at Chick-fil-A, at Prologix, at Walt Disney, at Popeyes. And I've written about these people in my books. And these are the people that actually mentored me about how to do it. And the other great speakers have been like me, where I've written a couple New York Times bestselling books. These guys have written 20, 30, 40 New York Times bestselling books. And they're just legends that really know how to lead. Every week you're gonna take away practical experience from someone actually running an organization or someone that's just an expert in teaching this stuff. I think it's gonna be a fantastic webinar series, and I'm really excited about kicking it off this month.
It's a new world. It's a new FLCMAA. Back and better than ever, helping you, your teams, and your clubs plan for tomorrow, today.